Fletcher, you have 10 seconds to hook the viewers into watching the rest of the video.
Pedro's here. He's got really important things to say, so I would stay tuned. Damn. He came with props today, huh?
Yeah, every time you say something that I think is terribly wrong, just gonna buzz that.
Hopefully it runs out of batteries.
All right, so welcome back. Today we're here with Fletcher Wheaton. Once again, we're talking about a very sexy issue, the current state of the real estate market.
I think that a lot of people right now are, we're in the summer months, we're in an election cycle. A lot of people that I speak to, if you look at any market, right?
Yeah.
Over the last 4 years, things are more expensive. So it's like, hey, is Cabo too expensive? And then I also have some stats from the US market too that I find super interesting as well.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, we both know that it's important for the real estate market in Cabo, it's important to keep a finger on the pulse of what's going on in the US. In Canada, which are like where most of the foreign investment is coming from. So, and recently there's been like a lot of things that have been happening that like directly affect what's going on here. So what data did you bring?
Well, okay. So first of all, we had a recent video. Sales are still down 35%. We really have, let's call it like basically 1 quarter to go when you factor in closing times. On a dollar for dollar basis, it's down 31%. So you've seen, I just saw Chileno Bay land, Palmilla. So you still have like these really high-end purchases that are happening. When I look at the US, because a lot of people are just like, hey, it's Cabo's gotten expensive, and it's obviously like prices have risen. I follow this guy, Lance Lambert. He is part of Resi Club, and they do analytics on real estate in the US. And just a couple things is, in the United States right now, 60% of current homeowners would not be able to buy their existing home right now with the current income they have and current mortgage rates.
Right.
So like literally 60% of you like basically were like, hey, you have to rebuy your house right now, would not be able to buy. Just showing how unaffordable. And this whole podcast was about, he called it literally the most unaffordable housing market in US history. The average price of a home in the US is up 45% since March 2020. Just like you wouldn't compare, Colima to Cabo or Guanajuato to Cabo, you're not gonna compare Detroit to Miami or LA to Nebraska, right?
Knowing this information, a homeowner in the US, knowing that they wouldn't be able to afford their home right now, 60% you said?
Yeah.
What do you think like the reaction would be to people knowing this information? Because would it make them want to sell, or would it
no. So this
hold on to the property?
So basically, a lot of people like locked in a lower mortgage rate, right?
Yeah.
And like that went up drastically. So I think the people that own the homes are generally like pretty well off, like the boomers. It's the younger generation that is really priced out from that, and you can blame that on all sorts of things, but that's really a reality. So and then you have an election, like you have a lot of, we've seen interest rates come down a little bit, and that's a huge predicator of how the market's gonna react in the US. And like you said, that has a huge chain reaction on people coming down here, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you have your major markets like California and Texas, especially California with home prices just being so high, that, gravitating towards Cabo is not as drastic as, let's say, somebody from the Midwest, where it's probably much more on par with what they're used to.
Yeah.
With like the current house they're living in.
Yeah, so there's all of this going on like with interest rates that probably want to make people like make a choice soon, right? But we know that after the election, things can change, and maybe the decision you would take right now is not the decision you would make like early next year after that. So people are just like stopping there, and you know what? I'm not gonna move anything until.
No, exactly. So people aren't dumb, and we don't act like they are. Okay, well, a lot of agents here do, right? So they know what's going on in the market here.
Yeah.
So there's this holding pattern right now. And with that, you know, like there's actually less listings coming on the market right now, but you still have a lot of listings, a lot of inventory. So it's still very much a buyer's market.
Yeah.
You know, and people think that's going to come down further. And it's like, okay, we'll see. And I've seen where that happens and people can miss out. I'm not going to say that's what's happening, that people understand that. And when you have the election, it's a great excuse not to do anything. So we're kind of in this holding pattern right now. You know, a couple other things is right now, what percent of U.S. single family homes are owned by investors? And for this past year, one out of every 5 homes, 20% was bought by an investor. And in 2023, that was 1 in 4. And that's what I'm saying. These are like people that don't need the home. They're buying the home to get like rental income.
Yeah.
Right? That's a huge thing. But that's also what's happening here. A lot of people are not buying to live here. They're buying as a vacation home. They're buying as a rental property. You know, some of them are, or they might have it like that and then they move down here in the future. Another thing that's just like outrageous right now in the United States is insurance costs. Florida is insane right now for homeowners insurance. I'm talking like your homeowners could have been, you know, let's go 4 years ago, $2,000 a year. Then it jumps up to like $6,000 a year, $7,000 a year.
Yeah.
So you're talking like a 400% increase over the years. So last year, over 25% of the states had an increase in homeowners insurance of 10% or more. Texas homeowner insurance increased 25% last year. Homeowner insurance has increased 102% in the last 3 years in Florida and cost 3 times the national average. And then like, man, car insurance has gone up 40% this year.
Yeah.
So think about like you're a young, you know, 25-year-old and you're like driven. What are you gonna do? Like you're probably gonna be renting, because you have some stats on the Mexican market. But at the end of the day, what I wanted just to show is like, hey, I talk to a lot of people and I'm not disagreeing with them. It's like Cabo in 2020, you know, the same place that's $400,000 right now was $300,000.
Yeah.
Okay. But like, that's not any different from where you're coming from. And to be honest, I don't think that's very different from anywhere. Matter of fact, what this guy said at the end of he kept going. He was like insurance, then it's like the mortgage rates, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then he goes, well, if you think that's bad, don't worry. It's even worse in Canada, because Canada had very conservative banking lending standards during the 2008 crisis. So they didn't have as hard of a downturn. So their prices kind of stayed steadier. So you could even argue that Canada, and like, I'm curious, Canadians, you're like, what do you think? But a lot of them I talk to aren't super happy with, it's very similar to the US, you know, not very happy with the political situation or the affordability situation, you know? And it's not like somebody comes in, it's not like the next president comes in and like waves a wand and snaps his finger and then all of a sudden it's fixed. Like we're talking like deep structural issues.
With all of that going on in the US and Canada, like for other places in Mexico, if they look at Cabo, they think, okay, then it's an expensive place to live in. But for someone from the US or Canada, they might look at the real estate market here and find like more attractive prices. This is like obviously a conversation that a lot of people are having right now. Like, are these prices getting a little too adjusted for, like, are the prices becoming more American than Mexican? It's becoming too much even for foreign investors?
Yes. Depending on like who you are, right? So once again, if you're coming from Los Angeles, like that's a lot different than coming from, you know, Chicago, you know? So I think it depends, right? And a lot of people, like I just got off the phone, you walked in and she was talking about Florida. And I'm like, no, Florida's now, and this is what you have, like people were moving from California to Texas and then New York to Florida. And now those people are like, wait, not only has it gotten more expensive, but like now you know, especially California to Texas, they're like, wait, it's like super hot in the summer, you know, like I didn't take this into consideration. And this is not the Mecca that I thought it was going to be. Cabo offers a lifestyle. Do I think there can be some balancing in the market? Absolutely. That depends, right? Are you comparing like Tazal? Then it's like, man, you go up to Todos Santos, it's beautiful. It's still a lot of land, but maybe somebody doesn't like that, and they like being in the amenities of basically like a first world city, right? Whereas you go out there and it's kind of like, hey, you're getting away from it all.
Yeah.
So I think it just depends, but Baja just has so many different ways to go. I personally do think that there needs to be more affordable type housing. Everybody's trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, there was a conference a few months back in San Jose. The guy who was presenting, I don't remember his name, but he said the demand, like everything is aiming at affordable housing for like people who are coming over here for work, but everyone wants to stick to luxury, to high-end homes, high-end developments like near the golf course and everything. And I think it's the same as having like an infrastructure issue. Like you need the infrastructure for everything else to work. You need the affordable housing for the people who are coming to work here for everything else to work. It can't all be high-end.
No, so
homes.
like they don't have to be necessarily like Ocean View. Like there's a lot of places where you can build like good developments that don't have to be expensive, and you have like, a house, a piece of land, and like an HOA community where you feel safe, right? I think like that is something for sure, but everybody, it's like an ego thing for developers, man. They want to like show everybody like what they've done as opposed to like doing something that makes sense. We'll see, but like workforce housing is a great idea. The thing is for example, in workforce housing, like let's just say a great idea, in my opinion, is literally to do workforce housing for basically like, 50 to 100 rooms where like construction workers can go stay. The only issue is the lower you get on a price point, the more likely you are to accept rent in the Mexican peso. If you're an American that's investing in something like that, it becomes less attractive just because you have the currency come into play. But another thing is like, man, all these hotels, we got another one open up down here, it's just all 5-star hotels and they're staying busy. But I think there is a point where you get saturated, and it's like, there's cool places where like, I personally think like renovating a place downtown and doing a hostel or something, but everything is catered towards the high end. And when you get to a certain point, like there's not really a shortage right now of that type of, like in Palmilla. Yeah. Literally, like the guy, Michael Baldwin's like, I don't have any more inventory. That's one play, that's this, but then you have this, this price point, let's call it, maybe 300 to like $1 million, right? That type of buyer that has the capacity, maybe they don't want to go up to that price point, but they could. It's to a point where, things have got expensive and people are saying like, hey, maybe my money's better in the stock market. Because a lot of the people that I work with, that's what it is. It's basically kind of like a diversification. They love Cabo. They love Baja. They can use it. They can rent it out. It's almost like a flex too. Like they're proud to be down here and be able to get away. Especially like the lady who I just spoke to from Seattle. She's like, I can't do rain. Like I need to be in a place that doesn't have rain. And she's looking at Arizona. It's like Arizona doesn't have the ocean, so. You
worked in real estate before you came to Cabo, so you worked in real estate in the US, in New Orleans, right?
Yeah.
So you basically have like both experiences and you know about the market both here and in the US. Like, is there a similar issue to what's going on here to anything you've seen over there?
First, generally you have more like initiatives to help out from a government standpoint. But still, people in the U.S. will tell you that that's not entirely true, and due to like regulations, and they have merit behind them and they're like well-intended, but they just don't make sense. And even like the developers are like, hey, they're making us like, we'd have to do this. And we have to, it gets too burdensome where they're like, hey, we're just not going to do that. So I think you have more help. But at the end of the day, that is what I want to like reiterate is that, you look around the United States right now and it's like, unless you want to go buy in some rural suburb of like Pittsburgh, the big cities are or even anywhere around them are pretty hard to find deals, especially when you look at where it was, prices have gone up 45% in the last 4 years. And people keep saying it's going down. I just looked at another chart, like inventory starting to go up and like interest rates. So we'll see. Once again, got the election, but at that point, a lot of those people are like, they have to buy because that's where they live, right? Here, it's much more of a, you know, a different demographic. That's, I'm not going to call it like play money, but a lot of people here are, it's, you know, they feel comfortable and it's like, hey, I can make this because this is kind of like a discretionary purchase, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes like the same rules don't apply for people from Mexico and the US in stuff like 20% down payments. You said that is something low for the US, but it's something very high for people in Mexico, right?
Yeah. And like,
so for someone from the US, okay, 20% down payment, it's fine, but it's preventing people from Mexico. So that's like what we talked about before, that it's very much like a hybrid Mexican-American market, right? Where sometimes it leans more American and caters more to foreigners, and it prevents like people from Mexico like actually going into it.
for me, there's a lot of differences between real estate in the US and Mexico, especially like, and I don't like to classify all of Mexico when I speak about Cabo. Financing is the major difference. You know, like you can get a loan, you know, obviously you have to be qualified, but it's not like hard. Here it's a lot different. I mean, you were just talking, what are mortgage rates right now for Mexican buyers that would be buying here?
It went from 8 to 10%, I think, like since 2023.
Yeah, no, exactly. So like an American, especially in there, they always think back to like 2021, you know, when you had like these 3.5% rates. So when you hear something even close to double digits, you know, it's like, why would I do that? You know, like I'll do something else with my money. So it's a completely different market in that aspect.
Yeah, and it happens a lot like when you're dealing with a Mexican client and an American client, like as soon as you mention it to one, they can be, for example, closing costs, right? You sent an estimate of closing costs to a Mexican client, and they're like, what is this, right? Or the use of a closing attorney, for example. They don't see like, why do we need to add someone else to the equation? Where sometimes like someone from the US or Canada can be like, yeah, no, let's bring them on board and I'm fine with paying the closing costs.
I've never done a deal without a closing attorney, and I don't think I ever will. I've had one guy, and I think I've shared this before, but it was a home and then it had two separate casitas on the lot. And what had happened is like, even though they had the construction permits and did anything, that wasn't like manifested in the deed.
Yeah.
And he was like complaining about having and I'm like, dude, you want me reviewing legal documents, you know? And it extended the close like another month, and thank God we found it, you know, because this would have been issues down the road. So
did you end up getting like...
Yeah, no, everything worked out fine. But the attorney, and it was literally like, it was funny because the next day that was brought up. So I think if you like Eduardo Tapia, a good friend of mine who's an attorney here, when we're off camera, he tells me stories and like they don't end well. You know, he's basically like, hey, I'm basically kind of like the doctor that people come to like after they get cancer or like after they like have been eating bad, you know, and instead of like coming to me before and like getting on a diet and like preventing this in the first place. He's like, and unfortunately, some of these problems are so tangled that like I just can't really do much. And they think it's like the US where you can just like take somebody to court and get a pretty quick resolution. So it's just, it's different. But that's kind of what I wanted to say is that, look, Cabo has gotten more expensive and there's exceptions to that rule. There's pockets. And I think people need to, and Michelle Pickett has said this, it's like they did a breakdown of all the projects. And 4 out of 100 were in what you would call like affordable housing. You know, and all these other ones are like, they're just shooting for the stars. But you see this like Azula, you know, which was an East Cape project, high end. And they didn't even get started just because they're like, hey, we don't have the demand. So like you start seeing that and then people kind of change their minds. You know, there's a lot of different things. You know, I got somebody that's looking at land on the Pacific side right now, and I've gotten estimates of this piece of land that they were looking at was like 9 miles from electric. And there is a huge power demand right now. And there's not enough supply. And this guy sat me down who's doing a development on the Pacific side. And he's like, Fletcher, he's like, I'm not talking 5 years. I'm not talking 10 years. I'm like talking 15 or 20 years because there's such a strain on the electric grid because the population has grown here over the past 4 decades so rapidly. And then there's not just CFE's like a government agency. And at the end of the day, Baja is kind of an afterthought, man. It's like almost like Hawaii is to the US. It's not like the government is quick to send resources anywhere here, let alone Baja. It's just a different market. I wish, like, for example, the East Cape, that's even worse, you know, when it comes to infrastructure, you know? So hopefully these types of areas can get that in. So there's like an easier way to do something that makes sense, right? But right now, Lance Lambert, this is the most unaffordable housing market in the history of the US, according to him. You know, and like going back data like to the early 1900s, you know? And once again, I don't think about somebody like my parents when I'm saying that, or somebody who's like near retirement. I'm talking about, you know, the people that are the next generation. You know, that lady I just spoke to, she admitted that she had to do she basically told her son that he was getting his inheritance now. So she put down like the 30% on his house because she knew he was doing everything in his power, had a job, like went to school, you know, was like busting his ass at work, yet still, you know, with car insurance up, you know, home insurance, it's dude, and we're talking, that's Seattle. Seattle's not cheap either. It's like that everywhere you look right now, you know, and look, like even when you go to like Mazatlan, man, like I go to, I got family there and I go, it's not like that much cheaper. You know, it's kind of shocking how expensive some of those projects are. It's very interesting because you have the election and people are holding tight. Pricing is high. Will it come down? Like, I think a lot of that depends on what market you're in. And we'll see how it plays out.
I think we're about to see like a completely different landscape soon, for better or for worse. Like, I think people are thinking a little bit too pessimistic, you know, which is smart because they're not like spending pocket change. You know, it's necessary to be careful about the decisions you're making, especially if you don't know, like January next year could be a whole different deal.
And I mean, that's a good point too, is like, my job is not to convince you that you should be buying here. You know, like I have enough conversations where like, I don't mind giving you information, but when people, they'll be like, hey, try to change my mind. And I'm just like, I'm not going to waste the energy on that. You know, like I'll give you information, but when it's like, hey, I'm like, this is an uphill battle and I have too many things that are on the other side of that. But I'm happy to give people information. So it's like, hey, this is where we're at. Happy to give you information. But if that's how you are, you're not alone.
Like the last few clients that I've talked to, they've all been like very, very decided. Like, I know what I want. Like, I found it. I have the money for it. Like, I've made my decision. I'm 100% in. I'm not doing anything until November, you know? So like they could right now, but they just choose not to. And I respect that, you know? I'm not going to be like, no, it's going to be fine. Because it's not my place to say if it's going to be fine or not. But yeah, it's that's what I mean. It's necessary to.
Yeah, no, and like honestly, something like the Tazal area, I don't think much is going to change there until 2026, depending on what it is. Like, there's some good projects there. There's a lot of stuff, but I think just the imbalance between what people want, what they're getting, what they're willing to pay is just it's not in equilibrium right now. But once again, that gives you the chance, just like that lady said, she's like, hey, I can offer, you know, and they can say no. So we're getting to the point where I think you have that starting to come in, but a lot of people are sitting on their hands right now. And just like you, I don't blame them. And I'm not going to try to convince them.
Yeah, no.
I'm here to help them, and I think there's a lot of opportunities, but like I can tell when somebody's really going to use that and then somebody's just trying to have a conversation.
Let us know in the comments if you're facing a similar situation where it's like you've made a decision, but you don't want to make a decision until like after the elections or wherever you're watching from.
It'll be very interesting to see what happens with the election as somebody outside of the fray. I think I've seen enough, for my mental health. I think I'm going to be off social media for a little while.
Yeah.
And I don't get like excited either way, but it's getting a little tense, So it'll be interesting, and for that reason, I do think it's going to be like that. But let us know what you guys are thinking.
Yeah, make sure to like, follow, hit that like button, or Fletcher's going to hit me.
There you go, I'll hit this one.
And we'll see you guys later.